You said in Iran, the mission should be finish the job once and for all. Get it done. Restore deterrence squandered in Afghanistan. Question, what does that look like? Is that regime change? What does finishing the job look like to you?
Right. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely.
Very grateful for the opportunity. And I think you put a fine point on the issue many Americans are asking. But let me begin by just simply saying how proud I am of our men and women in uniform serving in harm's way at this very hour. I think Operation Epic Fury has been executed with extraordinary professionalism and in concert with our allies Israel. I think every American should be proud of our troops downrange and should be praying for them regularly. I also want to give President Donald Trump all the credit in the world for having the guts to pull the trigger. I mean, I was with the president in moments where he made the decision to send cruise missiles into Syria after they used chemical weapons on their own people, take down Qasem Soleimani, take down the leader of ISIS. So I can't say as I was very surprised that the president took such decisive action in this moment, but I think his efforts here, his efforts a year ago to finally take the fight directly to the source of global terrorism, the mullahs in Tehran, is commendable and historic and is going to contribute mightily to the security of the American people.
All right, so what does finishing the job look like? If finishing the job there is, how do you define that?
Well, I think we've got two opportunities in front of us.
Okay.
And they ought to prosecute this war until we achieve both of them. Neither one of which is nation building.
Okay.
And I know there's talk about regime change, and no one wants to see the regime in Iran change more than me. But it's how it happens. I think the first achievable objective is that the armed forces of the United States and our allies continue to pound the security forces of Iran so that they can no longer project force outwardly, but also we need to be pounding the security infrastructure that they use to oppress and murder their own people the last 47 years. We saw the threats this week, which to me sounded a lot like weakness by this regime, saying that they would treat anyone that took to the streets like those did in January as enemy combatants and had instructed their internal security to open fire. Not surprising. They have murdered tens of thousands of their own people, even in recent months. But I think hitting their military infrastructure and hitting their internal law enforcement security will then create the conditions where, once degraded, the people of Iran would be able to step forward and reclaim their country. I think that's step one.
Okay.
Step two, Chris, I think, is we have a historic opportunity in this administration to restore the deterrence that was squandered in Joe Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. I don't see it as any surprise that after Biden ordered that reckless withdrawal from Afghanistan, that we saw enemies of freedom emboldened around the world. Putin invades Ukraine a year later, a year after that, with Iran's full support. We see Hamas launch the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust on October 7th. I think by demonstrating that America remains the most powerful military in the world, the arsenal of democracy, we can send a message to Beijing, we can send a message to Moscow, enemies of freedom around the world, that America remains the leader of all free nations.
So if you're Israel, or you're one of America's Gulf state allies, or you're Turkey, or you're Iran is in a real difficult neighborhood. It's a difficult part of the world, or you're the Kurds. If you're watching this go on, are you concerned that what the United States is going to do is the opposite of what you just said, and that one day that President Trump will say, you know what, we've done everything we could do, the regime's not changing, and we're not putting boots on the ground, so we're out? What happens if the United States says, we did what we could do and we're out?
Well, I have a greater hope than that in this moment. Because that in and of itself would send a message that would erode American credibility even further on the world stage. But I want to say, Chris, when the president said the objective here is unconditional surrender.
Yeah.
Now we're talking the language, not of nation building, not of we're going to come in and we're going to impose a democracy on you, but it just said we need the people who have tyrannized the people of Iran, who have through surrogates, whether it be Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan, they have perpetrated violence against American forces, against America's interests, our allies, as the leading state sponsor of terrorism. I think to say to them that regime needs to throw down its arms, raise its hands in the air, and unconditionally surrender. That's how you create the conditions where the people of Iran, who are decidedly, in my long experience in these issues, Chris, the people of Iran are a decidedly modern population, very Western-oriented.
Mostly urban.
Mostly urban. I think last time I checked, more than half of the population of Iran is under the age of 35. These are people that want better, have been willing to risk their lives for better, and I think we need to give them a chance.
I'm going to let you get on with your life, but I got to ask you about this U.S. military campaign against Iran. This is from the Washington Post poll. 42% support, 40% opposed, 17% unsure. There's a Fox News poll that came out right at the beginning, showed similar thing, which is pretty evenly divided, a lot of skepticism. The kind of mission and commitment that you're talking about doesn't work with 42-40 kind of support, right? You'd have to rally the American people to say there will be casualties. You'd have to say gas prices will be higher. It will be difficult. It will be hard. I don't see I see an Athens problem here, right? Not a Sparta situation. Are the American people ready to go to war with Iran if that's what it takes?
Well, I think it underscores the fact that it's going to be incumbent from the president on down to be taking the case of the story of this fight to the American people. Look, this wasn't a moment where America went and started a war. This war started 47 years ago when the Iranian regime took Americans hostage, held them for more than 400 days. 3 years after that, with their allies and Hezbollah, they murdered 220 Marines, 20 more service members in the attack on the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut. Every single year since that, one administration after another has slashed at the tentacles of Iran that have taken violence to American forces, to American citizens, to our allies in the region, most especially Israel, and making that case that this isn't about starting a war. It's about finishing a war that's nearly 50 years in the making. I think you frame it that way. I think the American people will understand that if we see this through, we're not only going to defeat an enemy that we've been fighting with for decades, but the world's going to have an opportunity for greater peace and prosperity than ever before in that region and beyond.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.